Welcome back, deep divers. Ready for another plunge into history's fascinating and sometimes a little freaky sources.
Today we're going deep, really deep into a topic that always sparked a mix of fascination and fear. Egyptian magic.
Right, it's like you think of pyramids and pharaohs, and then you've got all these spells, charms, curses.
Exactly. And it's not just pop culture stuff. We're talking about a system of beliefs and practices that were absolutely central to ancient Egyptian life.
So for this deep dive, we're calling it The Lost Science of Words of Power, Sacred Rituals, and Divine Influence. Catchy, right?
But also, it kind of gets at that intriguing mix, the science, the ritual, the divine. How did those all fit together for them?
Well, that's what we're here to unravel. We've got this incredible source, Egyptian-magic.pdf, that's packed with insights. And the mission, should we choose to accept it?
Is to understand, based on this document, what magic really meant to the ancient Egyptians, how it worked within their belief system.
Not just the how-to of their spells, but the why, the significance, the whole worldview behind it.
Right, because you can't just separate magic from the rest of their culture. It was woven into everything, their religion, their daily lives, how they prepared for death.
Speaking of which, that's one of the first things that kind of jumps out at you. Like, the Egyptians believed in a supreme god, right?
Oh, absolutely. A creator deity, a source of all things.
But then they've also got this huge emphasis on amulets, charms, spells, all this stuff that to us seems, well, kind of magical.
Right, and that's where a lot of outsiders got it wrong. They saw it as primitive superstition, or maybe even black magic.
But the document makes it super clear magic, for the Egyptians, wasn't separate from their religion. It was a part of it.
It was a tool. It was
Yeah.
a way to interact with the divine, to influence events, to protect themselves, and it wasn't just about appealing to benevolent forces for help either.
Oh, so it wasn't like, please, oh, great gods, protect me from evil.
Not always. The Egyptians, get this, believed they could actually command the gods.
Command the gods. Well, hold on. How they think they could pull that off?
Through the power of language. Specific words, uttered in the right way, by the right person, were believed to have immense power.
Oh, okay, so it's like magic words.
Kinda. They called them hekau. Think of
Yeah.
it as sacred formulas, imbued with divine energy. And they weren't just spoken. They could be written down, too.
Written down, like on papyrus scrolls or something.
Exactly. Or carved onto precious stones, or painted on amulets. So they had these portable sources of power, these talismans that they could carry with them.
Which explains why archaeologists find so many amulets in Egypt.
It was a nation of amulet wearers. Everyone who could afford it had one. And it wasn't just for the living either. Amulets were super important for the dead.
Right, because for the Egyptians, the afterlife was a huge deal.
Huge deal.
Yeah.
And they believed that to have a good afterlife, your body had to be preserved intact. So amulets were placed on and even inside mummies for protection.
Protection from what?
From all sorts of things, from decay, from evil spirits, from anything that might prevent them from reaching the field of reeds, their version of paradise.
Interesting. So these hekau, these magic words, were like a safety net for the afterlife.
Exactly. And speaking of safety nets, the document tells this crazy story from Apuleius, a Roman writer.
Yeah.
It's about this guy, Telephron, who's guarding a dead body.
Guarding a dead body. Why?
Well, because in those days, there was this fear of witches, especially these witches from Thessaly in Greece, who were believed to be super powerful.
Thessalian witches. I've heard of them. Like they could shapeshift and stuff, right?
Right, they could turn into weasels, birds, dogs, even flies, and they would try to steal bits of flesh from dead bodies to use in their spells.
Ew. So Telefron's job was to make sure the body stayed intact.
Exactly. And the instructions he's given are super specific. Stay awake, don't look away, not even for a second. You can tell there's this real fear of what these witches could do.
Yeah, spooky. So what happens? Does he manage to protect the body?
Well, an Egyptian prophet named Zaklas shows up, and he seemingly brings the dead guy back to life using a plant and some prayer.
Wait, brings him back to life, like a resurrection.
It seems so. And what's interesting is that Zaklas touches the dead man's mouth and breast several times during the ritual.
That sounds familiar, like the opening of the mouth ceremony the Egyptians did.
Right. So even in this Roman story, you see an Egyptian figure associated with powerful magic.
But what about poor Telephron? Did he get a reward for guarding the body?
Actually, he gets totally tricked. Turns out, while he was asleep, because no one can stay awake forever, the witches snuck in and replaced the dead guy's nose and ears with fake ones.
Seriously?
Right.
That's kind of messed up, even for witches.
Right. And when the resurrected man reveals this, Telephron is publicly humiliated. It really shows you how outsiders viewed Egyptian magic. Powerful, mysterious, and a little bit scary.
Makes sense that they had this reputation. But it wasn't just outsiders who were impressed. The document mentions this Egyptian text, the Westcar Papyrus, where they talk about ancient magic,
Oh
too.
yeah, the Westcar Papyrus. It's got these amazing stories about a sage named Tata, who's supposed to have incredible magical abilities.
Like what?
Well, they say he could reattach severed heads.
Reattach severed heads. Whoa, okay, that's next level.
And not just that. He could make a lion follow him around just by dragging a rope behind him. And he knew the secret location of Thoth's sanctuary, which even the pharaoh King Khufu wanted to find.
So he was like a celebrity magician?
Basically. And to prove his skills, he performs this crazy demonstration for Khufu. He has them bring in a goose, a ketai bird, not sure exactly what that was, but some other kind of bird and an ox.
Okay, a goose, a mystery bird, and an ox. Got it.
And then he has their heads chopped off.
Whoa, hold on. This is getting intense.
But then, using his words of magical power, he reattaches the heads and the animals come back to life.
That's wild. So the Egyptians believed in some seriously potent magic. But how about the tools they use? What about all those amulets we talked about?
Right, let's get into those. The most basic one, the one almost everyone wore, was the amulet for protection.
Protection from what, though? Like, were they worried about getting mugged by mummies?
Not quite. But they did believe in all sorts of threats, both physical and spiritual. Wild animals, evil spirits, curses. Amulets were their way of warding off those dangers.
Makes sense. But the document says that amulets for the dead were even more important.
Oh, absolutely, because remember, preserving the body was crucial for the afterlife. So amulets were placed on and inside the mummy to protect it on its journey.
Okay, but there were two types of amulets, right? Some with writing, some without.
Exactly. The ones with writing had these magic formulas, the hikau, inscribed on them. Initially, priests would recite prayers over the amulets to empower them.
So it was like charging them up with magic?
Yeah, kinda. But later on, they started writing the hikau directly onto the amulets themselves.
So it became like built-in magic,
Yeah.
portable power.
Exactly. And these hikau were considered so important that there was even a section in the Book of the Dead dedicated to making sure they reached the deceased quickly in the afterlife.
The Book of the Dead. That's like their guide to the afterlife, right?
Exactly. And the document also mentions these really early amulets made of green schist found in pre-dynastic graves.
Pre-dynastic. So like before the pharaohs even came along.
Exactly. And while we don't know exactly what they meant, they definitely point to some kind of early belief system.
So even way back then, they had some concept of magic and protection.
It seems so. And over time, these early amulets evolved into the more familiar ones we see later, like the heart amulet.
The heart amulet. What was so special about that one?
It was super important. It was linked to chapter XXXB of the Book of the Dead, which is one of the oldest and most significant chapters.
And what was the purpose of this heart amulet?
Well, remember how the physical heart was removed during mummification? The heart amulet was like a spiritual replacement.
Ah, so it was a stand-in for the real heart in the afterlife.
Exactly. And it was supposed to protect the deceased's heart during judgment in the Hall of Osiris. You see, they believed that the heart was weighed against the feather of Ma'at, which represented truth and justice.
Oh, wow. So if your heart was heavier than the feather,
No.
bad news.
Not good. And the heart amulet was there to help make sure that didn't happen.
So it was like a magical get-out-of-jail-free card for your heart.
Kinda. But there's more. The text actually quotes chapter XXXB. The heart itself speaks, and it pleads with the gods not to betray the deceased.
So it's like the heart is a witness in the trial.
Exactly. It's like their conscience speaking up for them in the afterlife. It even mentions this fear of the Shenet, these beings that shape human destinies.
It all sounds so intense, like no wonder they were so obsessed with protection.
And speaking of protection, there's another important amulet, the scarab.
The scarab, that's the one shaped like a beetle, right?
Right. And it was connected to the sun god Khepra, who represented rebirth and transformation.
Rebirth. How so?
Well, the Egyptians saw scarab beetles rolling balls of dung, which to them symbolized the sun, and it reminded them of the sun's daily journey across the sky.
I see. Like the beetle was pushing the sun along, just like it pushed those dung balls?
Yeah. Exactly. So the scarab represented the sun's rebirth every morning, and, by extension, the potential for human resurrection.
That's pretty deep. So wearing a scarab amulet was like carrying a little piece of the sun's power with you.
Exactly. And they were made of all sorts of material, stone, carnelian, lapis lazuli, even glazed faience.
Fancy. And I bet they were inscribed with Hikau, too.
Oh, absolutely. Often with chapter XXXB, the one about the heart or other protective spells, the document even mentions one found on a mummy that had that chapter inscribed on it.
So it was like double protection for the heart, the
Yeah.
physical amulet, and the written spell.
Exactly. And what's interesting is that scarab amulets weren't just an Egyptian thing. They were popular in other cultures too, like in Western Asia and the Mediterranean.
Really? So the Egyptians were trendsetters.
Huh. I guess you could say that. The document even mentions a Greek magical papyrus from a later period that describes a ritual for consecrating a scarab ring.
Oh, a ritual. Tell me more about that.
Well, it was pretty elaborate. They had to place the ring on a special table with linen cloths, burn incense, anoint it with ointment, leave it undisturbed for 3 days, and then offer sacrifices.
Sounds intense.
It was. And the spell they recited started with, I am Thoth, invoking the god of magic and knowledge.
So they were calling on Egyptian gods even in their Greek rituals.
It seems so, which shows you just how influential Egyptian magic was.
Okay, so we've talked about the heart amulet and the scarab. What other kinds of amulets were there?
Well, there was the buckle amulet, or tit. It was usually made of red materials like red jasper or carnelian, and it was shaped like a buckle or a knot.
A buckle. What was that supposed to protect?
It was connected to the goddess Isis and her blood, which was believed to have healing and protective powers. It was linked to chapter CLC of the Book of the Dead, which invokes Isis's blood to protect the deceased from harm.
Isis's blood, powerful stuff. So they believed that wearing this amulet would give them some of her protection.
Exactly. And it was also supposed to help them access all parts of the underworld.
Like a magical passport.
Kinda. And then there was the vulture amulet, usually made of gold. It represented Isis again, but this time as a mother protecting her child.
Oh, right, because Isis was the mother of Horus.
Exactly. And the amulet was supposed to give the deceased that same kind of maternal protection. It was connected to chapter CL7 of the Book of the Dead, which talks about Isis hiding Horus in the papyrus swamps to protect him from Set.
Set, he was the god of chaos, right? Always causing trouble.
Yep. Always trying to mess things up. But Isis outsmarted him and kept Horus safe. So wearing the vulture amulet was like invoking her power to protect you from whatever dangers might lurk in the afterlife.
I like it. A mother's love, even in the afterlife.
Powerful stuff.
Yeah.
Then you've got the ladder amulet, which represented the ladder that Osiris used to ascend to heaven.
Ascend to heaven, Ursa, like going up to the realm of the gods.
Exactly. And it was said that Horus helped his father climb this ladder. The document even mentions texts for King Pepi, where they talk about both the ladder of Set and the ladder of Horus.
So there were multiple ladders, like a celestial stairway.
Seems so. And there's also a reference to magical power being used on Ra, the sun god, in connection with this ladder.
Oh, interesting. So it wasn't just about climbing physically. There was a magical element to it, too.
Right. And then there's the 2 fingers amulet.
2 fingers. What's that all about?
Well, it's supposed to represent the 2 fingers that Horus used to help his dad, Osiris, up that ladder to heaven.
So it's like a symbol of support and guidance.
Exactly. And then we have one of the most famous amulets of all, the Eye of Horus, or Uchat.
The Eye of Horus. Yeah, that's a classic.
It was super popular, and it was used for all sorts of things.
Mm.
Protection, health, strength, vigor.
So it was like an all-purpose good luck charm.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And it was made of all sorts of materials: gold, silver, granite, lapis lazuli, even wood.
Wow. And I bet there were different versions of it too, right? Like facing left or right.
Right. And there's a theory that the 2 different directions represented the 2 eyes of Horus, or maybe the sun and moon.
That's cool, like cosmic duality. The document also mentions this phrase, me utchat, which means filling of the utchat. What's that all about?
It's believed to be connected to the sun at its strongest point during the summer solstice. So it's like filling the amulet with the sun's power.
Ah, I see, like solar charging.
Exactly. And there were specific rituals for maximizing the benefits of the Uchat amulet, like making one out of lapis lazuli plated with gold and offering it to the sun god during the summer solstice.
Sounds fancy.
It was. And the Uchat wasn't just an ancient thing either. The document gives an example of it being used in a Greek spell from the 4th century AD.
Wow. So the Egyptians' influence lasted for centuries. What was this spell about?
It was a spell for finding a thief. It involved using herbs, writing a magic word on a wall, and then hitting it with a wooden hammer while reciting a bunch of divine names.
Sounds effective. So the Eye of Horus was still a powerful symbol even centuries later. What other amulets do we have?
Well, there's the Minot amulet, which was like a heavy collar or necklace made of beads.
Beads. So fashionable and magical.
Exactly. It was associated with goddesses like Hathor and Sekhmet, and it symbolized things like rejuvenation and pleasure.
Sounds like a good amulet to have.
And then there's the pillow or headrest amulet.
A pillow amulet, that's a new one.
It was literally shaped like a miniature headrest, the kind they used in real life. And its purpose was to make sure the deceased could raise their head in the afterlife and that it wouldn't get separated from their body.
Makes sense. Can't imagine that would be a fun situation in the afterlife.
And finally, there's the steps amulet.
Steps, like stairs.
Yes. It represented the steps that led to Osiris in the Field of Reeds, their version of paradise. The deceased would pray to be given a place with Osiris on the top of the steps, which was considered a place of honor.
Ah, prime real estate in the afterlife.
Exactly. So you could see just how important amulets were to the Egyptians. They were like these little portable power sources that could protect you from harm, ensure a good afterlife, and even help you achieve specific goals.
They really thought of everything.
They did. But amulets weren't the only magical objects they used. They also had magical figures.
Figures, like statues.
Yes, exactly. But these weren't just decorations. The Egyptians believed that the figure of a god, a demon, a person, or even an animal could actually become a vessel for that being's soul and power.
So it's like the statue could come to life.
In a way, yes. They believed that statues of the gods in temples actually housed the gods' spirits.
Whoa, that's wild.
It is. And this belief even carried over into the early Christian era in Egypt. The document talks about how early Christians would attack pagan statues because they believed destroying the statue would get rid of the spirit inside.
Interesting. It's like even with a new religion, they still held on to that belief in the power of these figures.
Exactly. They even thought they could compel the spirit of the Christian god to inhabit a statue, just like their own gods.
Wow, adaptable. So these figures were used for both good and bad, right?
Right. The document gives an example of a wax crocodile figure that was used to kill someone.
A wax crocodile. How'd they manage that?
Well, the story goes that this woman wanted to get rid of her lover. So she had a wax crocodile made and told someone to throw it into the water. And then it turned into a real crocodile, a huge one, 12 feet long, that dragged the guy underwater and killed him.
Yikes. Okay, so maybe don't mess with wax crocodiles.
Definitely not. But figures were also used to help the dead. Remember how they believed in this afterlife where you might have to do work?
Right, like farming and stuff?
Well, they didn't want to do that in the afterlife. So they would bury these figures with them that were supposed to do the work for them.
So it's like afterlife servants.
Exactly. And there's this early formula they used where the deceased would say, "I lift up the hand of the man who is inactive."
And that meant?
That meant they were off the hook for any manual labor in the afterlife. They would also have these stone figures made that represented them, and priests would say spells over them to make them come to life and do the work in Osiris's kingdom.
Clever.
Very. And eventually, this evolved into the use of Shabtai figures.
Shabtai figures. What were those?
They were small figures, often shaped like mummies, that were buried with the dead. And they were inscribed with spells that made them answer the call if the deceased was asked to do any work in the afterlife.
So like little magical helpers. The document actually quotes an inscription from a Shabtai figure belonging to a scribe named Nabsini. It's pretty cool. The figure basically says, hey, if they need someone to sow fields, water crops, or move sand, I'll do it. Leave Nabsini alone. He's earned his rest. Cool.
Yeah, he's great. And some tombs had hundreds of these Shabtai figures. They really wanted to make sure they had enough help in the afterlife.
I guess you can never be too prepared. But figures weren't just used in burials. They're also used in temple rituals, right?
Right. And this is interesting because even when the Egyptians were really advanced in other areas like astronomy and medicine, they still used wax figures in their most important rituals.
So it wasn't just a superstition they clung to. It was a core part of their belief system.
Exactly. And one of the most interesting rituals involved the use of wax figures to combat the evil serpent Apophis, who was the enemy of the sun god Ra.
Apophis, he sounds like a bad dude.
Oh, he was. He represented chaos and darkness, and the Egyptians were terrified of him.
Understandably. So what did they do with these wax figures?
Well, they had this whole book called The Book of Overthrowing Apophis, which detailed all sorts of rituals for defeating him.
Sounds like a must-read. What kind of rituals?
They would curse him, write down the names of his demonic allies on papyrus, make wax figures of them, and then destroy them in all sorts of ways, tying them up, kicking them, stabbing them, and finally burning them.
Whoa. Talk about a dramatic ritual.
It was. And they believed that by destroying these figures, they were weakening Apophis and protecting the world from chaos.
So it's like sympathetic magic, right? Harming the figure harms the real thing.
Exactly. And they would do this regularly, too, not just when they were feeling threatened. It was like preventative magic.
Smart thinking. What other figures were used in rituals?
Well, there was the Ta Seeker Asar figure, which was a wooden figure that represented 3 different gods, Ta, Seeker, and Osiris.
3 gods in one figure. What was the significance of that?
Well, each god represented a different aspect of the cycle of life and death. Ta was associated with creation, Seeker with the sun's journey through the underworld, and Osiris with resurrection.
Ah, I see. So the figure represented the whole circle of life, death, and rebirth.
Exactly. And they would write prayers on the figure and its stand, asking for the protection and blessings of these 3 gods.
Makes sense. Anything else interesting about these figures?
Yes, they would sometimes place a small mummified part of the deceased body inside the stand of the figure.
Whoa. Now a bit creepy, but I guess it makes sense if they believed in the power of these figures.
Right. And later on, they even started putting papyrus scrolls with chapters from the Book of the Dead inside the figures for added protection in the afterlife.
Talk about going the extra mile.
They did. But figures weren't just used for protection and rituals. They were also used to influence dreams.
Dreams, really?
Yeah. The document tells this story about Nectanebus, who was this magician king. He used a wax figure of Olympias, the mother of Alexander the Great, to send her a dream of the god Amun visiting her.
Whoa. So he was like a dream manipulator.
Exactly. And he also used a bewitched hawk to influence the dreams of Philip of Macedon, Alexander's father.
So they believed you could control people's dreams through magic.
It seems so. And there's even a tradition that says Aristotle gave Alexander the Great some wax figures to use in battle.
Aristotle, the philosopher.
The very same. According to this tradition, he gave Alexander these figures that represented the different armies of his enemies. And then Alexander was supposed to nail them down in a box and say spells over them.
And what was that supposed to do?
It was supposed to make Alexander's real enemies as helpless as the figures in the box.
Wow. So sympathetic magic again.
Yep. It's like what you do to the figure happens to the real thing.
Makes sense. It's interesting how this idea of using figures for magic shows up in other cultures, too.
Oh, absolutely. The document mentions Shakespeare's play, Henry VI, Part 2, where witches melt a wax figure to harm the Duke of Gloucester.
Yeah, Shakespeare loved his witchcraft.
He did, and there are more recent examples, too, from England. People would stick pins in hearts and burn them to try and harm someone.
Ouch. That's intense.
It is. And there's even a story from an Ethiopic manuscript about a Christian merchant who was healed when a model arrow was pulled from a wax figure of him.
Whoa. So the magic worked even across religious boundaries.
It seems so.
Oh.
Which just goes to show how widespread this belief in sympathetic magic really was.
Amazing. But it wasn't all about physical objects. The Egyptians also believed in the power of images and written formulas.
Right, and the Book of the Dead is full of examples of this. They often had illustrations or vignettes alongside the text, and these images were considered just as important as the words themselves.
So it was like a magical comic book.
Kinda. The document specifically mentions the instructions at the end of chapter CXA Phi, the negative confession. It tells the deceased to paint a picture of the Hall of Ma'at on a new tile, and then write the chapter on it.
The Hall of Ma'at, that's where judgment took place.
Exactly. And they believed that doing this would guarantee the deceased prosperity and a good supply of food in the afterlife.
Always thinking about their afterlife snacks.
They were. And the general belief was that every picture in the Book of the Dead, when combined with the right words, could produce a desired outcome.
So it was like a visual spell book.
Exactly. The document also gives an example from chapter CXA Vi. This chapter has words of power that are supposed to protect the deceased from dangerous beings that surround the sun god Ra at sunset.
Sounds intense.
It was. And the text emphasizes the secrecy of these words, calling them a great mystery and an abomination for ordinary people to know. The book containing these secrets was even called the Book of the Lady of the Hidden Temple.
Mysterious.
Very. And then you have the hypocephalus.
The hypo what?
The hypocephalus. It was this disc that was placed under the head of mummies.
Ah, okay. What was on it?
It was covered in pictures of gods and goddesses and all sorts of magical symbols. The document describes one that has images of Nehebka offering the Eye of Horus, a goddess with an Eye of Horus head, the cowl of Isis Hathor, Horus's 4 children, lions, a human limb, a pylon with Khmu heads, Horus Ra, boats of the sun and moon, gods Kepra, Horus, and Horus Sept in their boats, a two-faced god, a ram-headed god being worshipped by apes.
Whoa, that's a lot to unpack. What was the point of all those images?
Well, they were supposed to provide warmth and protection for the deceased in the afterlife. And there were prayers written on the hypocephalus as well, addressed to the god Amun.
So it was like a visual and verbal prayer for protection.
Exactly, makes sense. And the Book of the Dead has plenty more examples of these combined magical pictures and formulas. Chapter CC7, for example, has words of power to give the deceased eternal life, transform them into a star, protect them from serpents, and even prevent worms from eating their body.
Whoa, they really thought of everything.
They did.
Mm.
And then there are chapters CLE2 through CLXV, which are full of detailed instructions for making specific figures and reciting spells to achieve all sorts of benefits in the afterlife, like being able to drink from a celestial stream or shine like a star.
Cosmic perks.
Right. And then there's chapter CESD4, which is said to contain the essence of all the chapters of Coming Forth by Day.
So it's like the cheat sheet to the afterlife.
Huh. Kinda. And it's believed to be really ancient, dating back to King Hesepti, who ruled around 4300 BC.
Wow. So this knowledge was passed down for generations.
It was.
Yeah.
And the Egyptians believed that having these words of power was essential for navigating the afterlife. The document gives examples of Thoth using words to loosen Set's bandages, the gods resisting words spoken against the deceased, and even people being clothed in Ra's magical words for protection.
So words were powerful. They could heal, protect, and even command the gods.
Exactly. And two of the most important deities associated with magical words were Thoth and Isis.
Thoth, the god of wisdom, and Isis, the goddess of magic. Makes sense.
Right. Thoth was considered the ultimate source of knowledge and magic. He even taught Osiris the words of power that helped him defeat his enemies. And Isis was known for her skill with magic too. She learned her most powerful.